know the problem with Beethoven's symphonies, you're always waiting for the end. You have to go through about 10 false endings. Well, you've had the opposite problem today. You have to wait for the start. I hope you won't also have to wait for the end. First of all, thanks to Matt, who's been the main force behind this book. I had very little to do with it, to tell you the truth. And any of you who've been involved in book production will know that there's a lot of work involved and all sorts of people have to carry out all sorts of tasks, designing and typesetting and proofreading and advertising and one thing and another. So I want to say thank you to all those people as well. And I want to say thank you to the Ian Green and the folks out here at the great Stupa for allowing us the privilege of being inside this magnificent and wonderful building for this very modest occasion. It seems to be a little bit disproportionate that I should be here with my book in the presence of Padma Baba and Lord Buddha and all the other various bodhisattvas that you'll see around the Stupa. Cicero, ancient Roman orator. Brevity is the charm of eloquence. Brevity is the charm of eloquence. I can't promise eloquence, ladies and gentlemen, but I can promise brevity. Although, of course, brevity is a relative term. Matt has told you that I'm to say something about the book, so I'd better get to that. So the title of the book is Timeless Truths and Modern Delusions. And I want to mainly talk about the title and the subtitle. The subtitle is The Perennial Philosophy as a Guide for Contemporary Buddhists. So, the title first. You know when you go to a lecture and you see the fellow getting up or the woman getting up in front of the crowd and organising themselves at the lectern, do you sort of sneak a look at their notes and are a bit alarmed when you see a sort of sheaf of 30 or 40 pages and you think, oh my goodness, how long am I going to be here for? Here are my notes, ladies and gentlemen. One small page, so relax. Mark Twain said that took him a good week to prepare an impromptu speech. Well, this is a very short impromptu speech and it hasn't taken me a week to prepare. But I have done a little preparation, hence these notes. Now the scientists, ladies and gentlemen, the scientists, they tell us that we're mammals. Right? They tell us that we're mammals. Now I've told many of you many times before that you can't believe the scientists. We're actually amphibians. Why are we amphibians? Because we live in two different environments. We live in two different dimensions. Houston Smith, the great scholar of religion, said that the human situation was best summed up in the cross. You've got a vertical pole and you've got a horizontal pole. Well, let's start with the easy one, the horizontal pole. What is it? It's time and space. It's the world of flux. It's the world of contingency. It's the world of impermanence. It's the world where things come and go. It's this material world. If you like, samsara. But there's also a vertical pole. What terms could we use? Well, there are any number. Let me just throw a few around. If we talk about time on the horizontal, here we're talking about eternity. If we're talking about space horizontally, we're talking about infinity vertically. If we're talking about matter, its counterpart is spirit. Any number of ways we could put this. Earth and heaven. Samsara and nirvana. Houston Smith went on to say, we live in two kinds of time or perspective simultaneously. The horizontal and the vertical are at once quite distinct and entirely overlapping. And to experience their incongruity and confluence is what it means to be human. Worth pondering. Now, as the title of my book suggests, it explores two worldviews, two understandings of life, two understandings of reality. We shall sort of shorthand signal these by tradition on one hand, modernity on the other. Now, when we look at modernity, we like to think that we are faced with a sort of immense smorgasbord of possibilities. There's all these philosophies and ideologies and ideas swimming about all over the place. We can pick and choose. We can be materialists, empiricists, positivists, Marxists, any number of possibilities. These are all just variations on a single theme, ladies and gentlemen. What do they have in common, all of these modern ideologies and philosophies? What they have in common is that they aren't in the slightest bit interested in the vertical pole. In fact, most of them want to tell us there is no vertical pole. And insofar as they are prepared to concede that there might be some sort of vertical pole, well then it's merely a projection. That's the result of wish fulfillment, as Freud would have it. Consolation, a sort of dream world. It's not real. It's not real. That's the modern story. Tradition, of course, gives us a different story. Under any traditional view, whether it's Buddhist or Hindu or Christian or American Indian or Aboriginal or whatever, under any traditional view, this world of flux, this world where we are here and now, is actually a tissue of fugitive relativities. A tissue of fugitive relativities. In other words, it has no permanence. It is not immutable. It is not imperishable. And it is entirely dependent on the real world with a capital R for its very existence. It only has a relative reality. Furthermore, these traditions tell us that as human beings, we have access to that reality. We're connected. Let us look just very quickly. Very, very quickly. Some of you heard this before, be patient. Let us look very quickly at a few of the views of humankind offered to us in the modern world. Who are the heavy lifters? Who are the big thinkers? Well, let's start with Darwin. I'll be brief, I promise. What are we under the Darwinian scheme? We are biological organisms, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. We are biological organisms engaged in a frightful struggle for survival. We find ourselves in the midst of nature, red in tooth and claw. Stop laughing. What could we expect of such a creature? The naked ape, what could we expect of such a creature? Not much. Not much. Well, then there's Marx. What have we got now? Well, we're not the creations of a sort of inexorable natural iron law, as Darwin would have it. We're the creations of another kind of law, a kind of social and historical law, determined by the interaction of what Marx calls material forces. Man as economic animal. Not much comfort to be derived there either, is there? Oh, Freud, you said. Freud. Yes, well, that's the subconscious, ladies and gentlemen. You know what he called the subconscious, very rightly? A cauldron of seething excitations, over which we have no control, of which we are the puppets, the marionettes. Doesn't sound like a very dignified condition to me. Not happy about it. And so we could go on. Nietzsche and his epigones, his followers in postmodernist theorising, Foucault and company, it's all power relations, ladies and gentlemen. Didn't you know that? It's all power relations, everything. You want to talk about the Buddhist sutras, Buddhist traditions? It's all power relations. What does tradition offer us, on the other hand? It offers us an account of the human condition whereby we have dignity, we have responsibility, we have freedom, and we can attain to a higher state, described in different words in different traditions. Enlightenment, obviously, in Buddhism. And this creature, you and I, is a mysterious and wonderful thing. Here are the words of the Buddha. This might puzzle you. It puzzles me a little bit, but it's worth thinking about. In truth, I say to you that within this fathom-high body, that's you and me, in truth, I say to you that within this fathom-high body lies the world. Lies the world. And the rising of the world and the ceasing of the world. Compare that with these views I've been telling you about how meagre they are, how squalid they are, how one-dimensional they are, how horizontal they are. Guy Eden, a Sufi writer, said very rightly, I think, we know more and more about less and less. We know more and more about less and less. Our ignorance of the few things that matter is as prodigious as our knowledge of trivialities. All of the things we congratulate ourselves about, the advance of knowledge, the march of science, upward progress of civilization, etc. It's fraudulent, ladies and gentlemen. What are the great questions? Well, you know, you're thoughtful people, you know what the great questions are. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What's going to happen after I die? What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of knowledge? Or to use the ancient formula, which can't be bettered, how are we to understand truth, beauty, and goodness? Richard Dalton's got something to tell us about truth, beauty, and goodness, has he? I haven't come across it. If we want real answers to these sorts of questions, no use turning to the latest fashionable pointy heads. Do much better to go back to tradition, of which Buddhism is obviously one. There you will find answers to these questions, which were true when the Buddha taught them, when Padmasambhava taught them, when Shantideva taught them, when Milarepa taught them. They are as true today as they were then. There's no use-by date. They're true once and for all. Now, of course, I know some of you will get a bit restless at this point because you will want to tell me there's no such thing as truth. You go to the universities and sit in on a few classes in philosophy. This is taken for granted. No such thing as truth. Only relative truths, partial truths. Truths that come and go. No, ladies and gentlemen, there are timeless truths. And they are the most important truths. And they are the truths we will find in any great tradition like Buddhism. I haven't been telling you much about my book, but these themes are there in the book, expanded and elaborated. Nearly finished. So, the subtitle of the book, The Perennial Philosophy as a guide for contemporary Buddhists. This is Matt's subtitle. I was very nervous about the whole idea of setting myself up as a guide for anything. But, he insisted, so what could I do? The Perennial Philosophy, that view that says all of the religious traditions, all of them, centre on a set of immutable, timeless truths. I haven't got time to sort of expound the Perennial Philosophy now, but it's there in the book if you're interested. The general point of view is that, summed up in a formulation in the ancient Hindu scripture, the Vedas, truth is one, the sages speak of it by many names. The Muslims speak of it by these names, the Hindus by those names, the Buddhists by these names, the Australian Aborigines by these names. A multiplicity of forms, all sort of variegated and different from each other, but all vehicles for the same truths. Now, nearly finished. Buddhism. Buddhism in the modern world. Some of you want me to say something about Buddhism after all. I think there are two kinds of serious challenges facing Buddhism in the Western world. The first, related to what I've been talking about, bears on the question of their response, the response of Buddhism to the challenges of modernity. Let me just give you a kind of concrete example to sort of flesh this out a bit. So, when Colonel Alcott and the redoubtable Manam Blavatsky were in Sri Lanka in 1880 or whatever it was, and were very excited by their discovery of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, Theravadan form, they set up the Theosophical Society. What was the aim of the Theosophical Society? Well, if you read its manifesto, and I believe it's still intact, it is to reconcile religion and science. Mistaken project, ladies and gentlemen, a mistaken project. You can't reconcile the greater and the lesser. You might bring them into some sort of cooperative relationship, but reconciliation suggests a sort of synthesis of equals. They are not equals. They are not equals. Science is a modest pursuit. It has its place, but it's become a kind of totalitarian master instead of a humble servant. There are far too many Buddhists in the modern world falling over themselves, trying to reconcile the teachings of the Buddha and the great saints and sages with the findings of modern science. It is not up to any tradition to reconcile itself or verify itself by recourse to modern scientific findings. This doesn't mean we deny those findings or ignore them. What it means is that we realise that we're dealing with two things which are quite incommensurate. Because science deals with the material world, with mechanical processes and properties and mechanical causes, secondary causes, auxiliary causes. It has nothing to do with primary causes or principal causes. And you can see this. If you ask yourself the question, what does science have to tell us about the nature of a human being? Well, you can accumulate any amount of data about, brain cells and blood and flesh and reproduction and blah, blah, blah. Are you ever going to get to the end of it? No, you're not going to get to the end of it. At the end of all that, this ever-receding end, are you going to know what a human being is? No. You're going to know something about the material, physical properties and processes of the human organism. But you're not going to know what a human being is. So, the temptation for a lot of Buddhists in the modern world is to say, psychology and Buddhism are bedfellows. They go together. Well, of course, Buddhism has got a psychological orientation, and it always has. there is no common measure between Buddhist psychology and empirical psychology of whatever kind. And we get all sorts of nonsense kind of issuing from this misunderstanding. You know the one about hooking monks up to computers and stuff? You read about that? Mm-hmm. We want to know what meditation is. So what will we do? We'll get a bunch of Tibetan monks, and we'll sit them down and we'll tell them to meditate furiously. Sit down here, chaps, get on with it, meditate. And all sorts of wires stuck to their head and their heart and whatnot, and big computer screen. And waves and graphs and pie charts and things zinging backwards and forwards, all sorts of stuff. And they conclude the experiment and say, meditation. It's about alpha waves. That's it. You want to know what meditation is? It's about alpha waves, the production of alpha waves. Well, for goodness sake, mate. And how much does that tell us about meditation practically? Okay, so that's one kind of problem. Another kind of problem is that, or I nearly finished, promise, is arising out of transplanting a culture from one place to another. Now, as a result of the egregious vandalism of the Chinese, the traditional culture in Tibet has largely been destroyed. An act every bit as bad, probably worse, than anything we can think of in the annals of Western imperialism. Anyway, I won't get onto that. It's a story for another day. She said you were going to taser me if I went on for too long, and I'm starting to get a little bit nervous, but only a minute or two to go.
No, keep going.
So, the problems of transplantation. The Tibetan lamas brought Buddhism to the West in the 50s and 60s, and of course they're still coming. And this magnificent building and all the things we see in here by way of traditional iconography and so on are all part of that movement, the Tibetan diaspora. Now, the situation in Tibet is obviously very different from the situation in which we find ourselves here. Buddhism in Tibet was monastic, centred on the monasteries. That is where the heartbeat of Tibetan Buddhism was to be found. There were lineages very carefully traced through time. There were hierarchies. There were recognised authorities. It was predominantly male. Now, when you take that and put it into a situation like ours, which is pluralistic, egalitarian, and democratic, and multicultural, and there's all sorts of rumblings going on here, there and there about the social order, you've obviously got a lot of problems. Got a lot of problems to deal with. And so those are discussed also in the book. All right, I've gone on for far too long, and my wife is getting very twitchy, so I must stop. I will do so with one quote, which Matt very sensibly chose when he was whipping up a bit of publicity material. He chose a quote that I use in the book. It's from Truths Modern Delusions, and the quote goes like this: Our own time possesses no quality or criterion of values in regard to that which is timeless. It is the timeless that by its very nature is the measure of our time. If you didn't get a handle on that, you can ponder it in the book. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. It's very good of you to come out on a cold day. I hope it's been worthwhile, and even if you've been totally unimpressed with my peroration here, you can enjoy the building and the grounds and maybe some lunch. So thank you.